in what may be a tachycardia-inducing presidential race. 162 for Bush at this hour, Kerry 112. That's our estimate in the Electoral College map. Now, you'll notice so many states are colored in white, means the polls have closed there. We just don't know how things are going to go in all those states, including the big three, Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and for that matter, the middle three, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, where the polls have not yet closed. Now, Mika Brzezinski, we're on these returns like white on rice and analyzing everything, but why can't we make more decisions in more states? What's going on here?
Well, Dan, many states where the polls just closed, they're still in the white. For example, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, you pointed out. We have exit polls on these states, but they're so close that we have to wait on the vote count. Now, you might be asking about Ohio, because the polls there should have been closed at least 2 hours. Let's pull up the county maps in Ohio and take a look there. You can see a lot of counties are still in the white. We have exit polls that show a slim margin, but we're still waiting on the vote count, which so far is incredibly tight. Here's why it could be a long night in Ohio. Let's pull up the boards. Polls closed late in this traditionally slow counting state. Provisional ballots in Ohio, an estimated 400,000 could be cast there, and they get counted later. And also, the possibility of legal challenges hangs over this state, so it could be, Dan, more than just a long night in Ohio.
Well, if it's a long night in Ohio, it could be a long night before we know who the next president of the United States is going to be. John Roberts, a ton of money was raised and spent by both camps for this election. Besides television, where did it go?
Dan, most of it went into television, but a lot of money also went in to get out the vote campaigns. In terms of television, more than $500 million was spent just so voters could hear this.
I'm George W. Bush, and I approve this message.
I'm John Kerry, and I approve this message.
In fact, when you take a look at the advertising dollars that were spent, whether it was Republican television ads, whether it was Democratic television ads, or if you take the two ad buys and lay them one on top of the other, you can see, Dan, that all of the money was spent here through the battleground states, through the Midwest, over here in Colorado and in New Mexico, and deep down here in Florida. It's extraordinary to see how much money was spent in some of the individual states. For example, let's pull out Ohio here. $104 million went into the state of Ohio alone during this election campaign. But Ohio was the number two. Number one was Florida, where $116 million was spent on television advertising in the Sunshine State. Now then, how did voters feel about the tone of the advertising? Let's take a look at what the exit polls showed today as people went to the polls. 62% of voters believed that President Bush unfairly attacked John Kerry. 66% of people said they thought John Kerry attacked President Bush. Now, it's interesting to note here that that's not what surveys show. Surveys show that the Kerry campaign attacked President Bush far less than he attacked Kerry. But the outside groups, Dan, from the Democratic side, were almost exclusively attacking President Bush. There was also that other outreach telephone campaigns, get out the vote drives as well. 24% of people said that they were contacted by the Bush campaign. This is part of the get out the vote drive. 27%, though, were contacted by the Kerry campaign. So that's what we could see reflected tonight in the turnout for either side, Dan. If John Kerry did a better job at contacting people than George Bush did, perhaps he'll get more voters out to the polls. Dan?
John Roberts, quick look at the map. Bush 162, Kerry 112. This presidential race is still very, very much up for grabs. States in white, polls have closed, but no decision. Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters in New York. May be a long night, folks. We hope that you'll stay right in here with us. All night long so far, George Bush has led in the CBS News Electoral College race estimates. We now have Bush at 162, Kerry at 112. The states in red have gone for Bush in our estimate. Those in blue for Kerry. Those in white have had the polls closed, but so far no decision. Remember, we talked in terms of the big three, the middle three, and the little three. The big three, Florida with 27, Ohio with 20, Pennsylvania with 21. No decision in those states, may not be for a long time. Middle three, Wisconsin and Minnesota with 10 each for a total of 20. The polls have closed there, no decision. Iowa with 7 doesn't have the polls closed until the top of this next hour. Then in the little three, New Mexico with 5 electoral votes. The polls have just closed there, no decision. New Hampshire with 4 Polls have been closed there for quite some time. Hawaii, the polls will not be closed for a little while. So with the 9 most important states, none of them have been decided as yet. Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York. .30 in the east, 6:30 in the west. Bush picks up Louisiana in our CBS News estimate. Republicans pick up a Senate seat in South Carolina is our projection. The polls have closed now in 40 states, but this is far from over in terms of the presidential race. Right now, Senator Kerry is doing well in the Northeast, President Bush in the South and Midwest. So far, neither man has taken a state away from the other. That is to say, all the states that George Bush has carried so far, he carried in the last election. All the states that Al Gore carried, which we have estimated, have been carried by John Kerry. But the all-important battleground states are still a question mark, a slew of them. We just can't make estimates yet. A check of the electoral vote count shows President Bush is more than halfway to the 270 he needs to win re-election. But halfway is still a long, long way. And the national popular vote count at this hour, remember, well over 100 million votes are expected to be cast this year. We thought maybe we could put up the, let's try the national vote title for you here. There it is. President Bush running at 53%, John Kerry at 46%, but this is still an early hour. We'd just like to show you the national vote total from time to time. This is a popular vote. Now, looking at the map, we'll go back to our presidential map for you. All the states in red we estimate have been carried by George Bush. That includes Louisiana now. We just have put in George Bush's column Louisiana's 9 electoral votes. As you can see, George Bush, as expected, sweeping the South and southern border states on up into Indiana and West Virginia. Arkansas and Missouri, not yet decided in our estimation. All through the Midwest, running from Texas all the way up through the Dakotas, color it red, George Bush country, and Wyoming also has been put in his column by our estimate. That's what gives George Bush's 171, Kerry 112, with 270 needed to win. But let's make no mistake about it, until we know how Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania are going to go, to say nothing of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and Iowa, where the polls have not yet closed, we aren't going to know a whole lot. Now, the Louisiana in the presidential race has been, in our estimate, put in George Bush's column. However, the Louisiana Senate race, we do not yet have a decision in that, but Leslie Stahl's South Carolina Senate drops Republican. Big win for them.
Big hit for the Democrats. This was another one of those cases where the Democrats recruited a conservative candidate, Ines Tenenbaum, very conservative on values. She appears to have fallen to a man who's even more conservative than she is, Republican Jim DeMint. Taxes and jobs were the big issues. This was Fritz Holling's seat for 38 years. Let's take a fast look at the overall Senate situation. We told you there were 9 toss-up states, and that for the Democrats to regain control, they had to take over, win 7 of the 9. Now, Dan, they have to win all of the rest that are outstanding. And in Kentucky, by the way, that race there, 90% of the votes in, it's 50-50.
Well, that's the Jim Bunning, the Republican incumbent, the baseball pitcher, still having a difficult time closing the deal.
I'll say it's the last inning. Let's see if he can pull it out.
Bob Schieffer, in the presidential race, the big states, the states are going to decide it, they're still out. But George Bush has to be feeling at least pretty good about where he stands at the moment.
I'll tell you where they're feeling good, and they haven't been feeling good all evening about this. They're feeling much better about Florida right now. By the same token, the people in the Kerry campaign are feeling pretty good now about Ohio. Now, if George Bush loses Ohio but carries Florida, by my calculations, if he wins everything else that we think he's going to win, he would then have 240 electoral votes. He would then need to win Wisconsin, Minnesota, perhaps Michigan or Iowa to get himself up to 270. By the same token, Kerry, we think, is favored to have states that will give him 190 electoral votes to start. If he does win Ohio, that's 20 more, that brings him to 210. He absolutely has to carry Pennsylvania and Michigan, and then either Minnesota or Wisconsin maybe New Hampshire to get him over the 270 mark. Both of these men can lose one of these big states, Dan. I don't think either of them can lose two of them and go on to win the presidency.
Well, that's a good point. Now, I understand some people say, listen, that's too high a calculus for me, but not really, because when you boil it down, we've said from the beginning the big three, Florida with 27 electoral votes, Ohio with 20, Pennsylvania with 21. And just to underscore what Bob, the point he was making, was it's pretty hard to see how either man can win if he doesn't take two of those three. Not to say that it's impossible, to say that if you say, well, I want George Bush to win, then you have to pull for him to win two of the three states, Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. If you're pulling for Kerry, just the opposite. Let's go to Anthony Mason down in Miami, who's been watching for voting problems. Anthony, not many in the early going, any developed yet?
It's been pretty smooth so far, Dan. We've been talking about the legal ground war at the polls today. Well, we're going to show you an exchange caught by our Las Vegas affiliate, KLAS. Watch as a Republican lawyer who is challenging voters in Las Vegas is confronted by a Democratic county commissioner, Yvonne Atkinson Gates, outside a polling station.
But you're not going to disenfranchise black folks, okay? We're not going to let that happen.
600 Democratic lawyers from California at all these polling places, and they're complaining about local citizens getting involved in the process.
We live here.
What about the 600 Democratic
we
lawyers?
Live here.
Would you mind letting me talk to him,
I'm not
please?
going to let you know. You're not. You on my ground. You in my neighborhood.
It's a free country,
I
lady.
don't care. That's right. And you're in my neighborhood. And you.
A heated exchange in a heated election, Dan. There were no legal challenges, or have been none so far in Las Vegas or in Nevada. But during the day, campaign attorneys may have wanted to avoid the appearance of lawyering up the election. As polls have been closing, we have seen suits filed in Michigan, Florida, and Pennsylvania as attorneys try to stake their ground for any challenges tomorrow. Dan?
Well, Anthony Mason, by any reasonable analysis, someone could say, well, they don't want it to appear that there's been a lawyering up of the election, but in fact, in reality, by any reasonable analysis of what's going on, it's already been pretty well lawyered up. Russ Mitchell is in Philadelphia, has word about a challenge of absentee votes in Pennsylvania. Russ, tell us about it.
Well, Dan, yes, we have our first lawsuit of the night. Republicans have filed a suit in federal court questioning the validity of some 13,000 absentee ballots. I'm reading here because I want to get this right. Republicans have asked for additional time to count the ballots because they claim they have not been able to validate the absentee voters, and now a judge will hold a hearing tomorrow to evaluate these ballots. Now, let's say that John Kerry wins Pennsylvania, because we don't know that yet, and his margin of victory is more than 13,000 votes. We are then told that this lawsuit, again questioning 13,000 ballots, is a moot point. But we are also told, Dan, by several political observers here that this could be the first of several lawsuits to come.
Well, Russ Mitchell checked years ago here. It's no coincidence, perhaps, that this happened in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is one of those places where, at least in the inner city part of Philadelphia city proper, that John Kerry has to come out of there with a commanding lead in order to offset what is believed to be George Bush's strength in the central part of the state between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So when you say there are going to be other suits to be filed, could some of those be filed by the Democrats in other areas, or are you talking about the probability of more suits filed by the Republicans?
This is a probability of suits being filed by both sides in this case, and you're exactly right. John Kerry has to win big in Philadelphia. We are told by locals here in Philadelphia that perhaps this Republican lawsuit is something that was filed just in case this is an incredibly close election, as we saw obviously 4 years ago in Florida. That way, there's already a mechanism in place to challenge it. But yes, Dan, those lawsuits could come from both sides of the aisle.
Russ Mitchell in Philadelphia will be in touch with you. Let's go out west, looking ahead. The polls have just closed in New Mexico a short time ago. Bill Whitaker in Albuquerque, New Mexico. New Mexico has 5 electoral votes, but it's one of our small 3. We laid out 9 states. The 3 smallest of those being New Mexico with 5, Hawaii with 4, and New Hampshire with 4. Bill, Al Gore won New Mexico last time by 366 votes. It was even closer there than it was in Florida. What's the voting like today, and what's the word?
Well, Dan, in all the battleground states, there have been massive get-out-the-vote drives. But here in New Mexico, it seems that the parties have gone into overdrive to get out the Hispanic vote. Now, why? Because Hispanics make up 42% of the vote here, more than in any other state. And as you said, Forget about Florida. This was the site of the closest race 4 years ago. Al Gore won this state by just 366 votes, and the Bush campaign believes that if it can get a few more of those Hispanic votes, just a few percentage points more, they can actually win this state and its 5 electoral college votes. Now, the wild card here, the new voters, 130,000 of them, and they seem to bend towards the Democrats. Right now, it seems that New Mexico is headed for a photo finish. Dan?
Bill Whitaker, we're going to commercial. See you in a few seconds. Our CBS News estimate is that George Bush can be assured of 171 electoral college votes at this moment. John Kerry, 112 with 270 needed to win. All the states in white or the polls have closed, and we don't have an estimate yet in any of those states. The race is, it's humming along like Ray Charles, but there are increasingly fewer decisions until some of those states in the West get closed. John Roberts, we had that late tape from Osama bin Laden. Did it have any effect on the election as best we can tell?
Well, Dan, as close as we came to an October surprise was when Osama bin Laden showed up on television sets across America after being off of the airwaves for the better part of a year. And here's what our exit polling found. Of all voters, 56% said they thought that the bin Laden video was important. Of late deciders, people who only made up their mind in the last 3 days, 64% said that they thought that it was important. Now, don't forget, George Bush wants to remind voters of this critical aspect of his presidency. 55% of voters believe that George Bush is the one to trust on terrorism. So we're going to put a trust factor here. It's critical for George Bush to maintain that lead and for people to see the bin Laden video as another threat against America. But over here on the Kerry side, there may be some idea of outrage from people who believe that bin Laden still being out there is a problem for President Bush. We don't have the data to back up either one of those theories just yet, Dan, but that's one of the stories we're watching tonight. We'll revisit this a little bit later on and tell you how people are breaking one way or the other.
Well, a storyline at this hour goes along this lines. By most analysis, we are no closer to knowing who the next president of the United States is going to be right now at 9:44 Eastern Time than we did at 7 o'clock tonight when we first came on the air with this broadcast. That's because so many states are out there undecided. One of them is Wisconsin. In our middle 3 of importance, Ed, we had Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. Wisconsin is making it, both sides nervous because both sides think they may have to have it to win. What are the major issues in Wisconsin?
Well, I think both candidates have made an issue of religion in their lives, in their regular church attendance. And when you look at the issues that are important in Wisconsin, the most important issue is moral values. And if you look at the church attendance, which is a big factor, you look at those who went to church every week, more than a third of the population. About half of them went less often. 15% never went to church. Now, how did those groups vote? If you look at the people who went to church every week, President Bush gets 6 out of every 10 of those votes. Those who went less often, Senator Kerry gets a narrow majority, 51 to 48. Those who never went to church, Senator Kerry does very well, getting 66%. And one thing to keep in mind, that whole question of the definition of marriage that is on the ballot in so many states is also on the ballot in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is one of those states where you can register to vote on Election Day.
Well, 12 states with 170 electoral votes are still outstanding if you look at our map. Of those painted in red or blue, no turnovers yet. You're watching and listening to... Beg pardon?
And no surprise.
And no surprises so far. You're watching and listening to CBS News election night coverage. With 270 electoral votes needed to win, our CBS News estimate at this hour is Bush can be assured of 171, Kerry with 112, but the race is still wide open. So many states are undecided, and out west, many states are still voting. With us now, through the miracle of satellite television, is Vanessa Kerry, daughter of the Democratic nominee, who's speaking to us from Boston. Thank you very much for being with us, Ms. Kerry. How does the Kerry team feel at this hour? Got to be a little bit nervous.
we are, we are just waiting and watching and encouraging people to continue to go to the polls. We're optimistic, and I think we are a team who has always waited until everything is done before we really sort of either celebrate or not. And again, I feel really good about this evening, but it's really been, this decision is in the hands of the American people, and I think that's the best part about this, is that every vote that should be counted will be counted, and everybody should just go to the polls.
How does your father handle this? I mean, everybody handles stress like this in a different way. Does he pace the floor? Does he hum Springsteen? Does he watch television? Does he eat? What does he do?
No, I have to say, my dad has traveled this country, and he has really felt the hope the American people have invested in him, in his winning this evening. And I think that with that behind him, and knowing that he really basically wants to fight to give this country better leadership, he's been very focused on that. And it's been a pretty extraordinary thing to watch, and I've been humbled by it. And I have felt very privileged and very honored to have been a part of this campaign and to have watched my father really fight for something he believes in.
Well, Vanessa Carey, give us a little insight of the states that are still out. There's so many still out. Tell us the ones that, well, you personally feel very confident about, if any.
The state of Massachusetts. I have to say, I am somebody who, I'm a little bit superstitious this way. I don't like to make predictions public. I don't like to make my thoughts public. I'm somebody who will write them down, date them, seal them, and then show you to, I'll show you tomorrow. And if you'll give me that opportunity to continue that tradition, I'd appreciate it. But again, I feel good, and I think as we go into this evening, you're going to see that this country is elected to have a fresh start and a real change for the future.
Well, we'll certainly try to do that. How about Teresa Carey? How's she handling this? Does she walk the floor? Does she hum Springsteen? What does she do?
She's great. Teresa has a wonderful sense of humor. When I saw her today when we went to vote, she was just regaling with stories of being at the polls today in Pennsylvania and, just sharing some funny moments. And that's what I love about her, is that she's just very real. She's very down to earth, and she really knows how to read a situation and when it's time to laugh and when it's time to give a hug, and it's a wonderful thing.
Vanessa Carey, thank you very much for taking time out on this very busy and stressful evening to be with us. We'll see you along the trail. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you very much.
A short while ago, a network pool crew was allowed into the White House and into the president's area. We'll show you that videotape right now, if we can get it up. Sometimes it takes a little bit for videotapes to take hold. Here's the president and his family.
I believe I will win. Thank you very much.
Can't hear much.
I'm glad to be able to watch the returns here with my family and friends, and it's going to be an exciting evening.
Well, President Bush with the family, smiling. He's laid down aces so far. He has 171 to carry his 112 with 270 needed to win in our estimate. We'll be back with you soon. Dan Rather, CBS News. Good evening. 10 p.m. in the east, 7 p.m. in the west, and the polls have now closed in 44 states, including another swing state, Iowa. And like the other swing states, we can't yet estimate a winner. In the west, Montana and Utah go for President Bush as expected. Here's the electoral vote count at this hour. Remember, it takes 270 win. Our CBS News estimate is that President Bush now has 179 of the 270 needed to win. John Kerry has 112. However, the big decisive states, as you can see, there's the ones in white, are still out. Here's the latest national popular vote count. President Bush leading, as he has been all evening, this now in the order of 52 to 47%, with, we would guess, something less than a fourth of the total number of votes cast actually in and counted. Now let's look at the map. Remember, red states we project are for Bush, blue states we project for Kerry. These are our projections. Polls closed in 4 more states at the top of the hour. Let's look them over now, state by state. Iowa, perhaps one of the most important states when all is said and done tonight. 7 electoral votes. The Hawkeye State has had the polls just closed there. We have a lot of data in from Iowa, but it's in the category of too close to estimate. So what's projected in Iowa is a very close race for Iowa's 7 electoral votes. Who knows, it may come down to Iowa in the end. Nevada, 5 electoral votes. Silver State, another state where it could all come down to Nevada. The Republicans, by consensus, pretty much expected to carry it. However, the Democrats thought they might slip in and take it away. The polls have closed there. This is a case of, again, too close to estimate in Nevada as well. Utah, 5 electoral votes. In the Beehive State, it is a beehive for George Bush, 5 electoral votes in Utah. Montana, also expected to send its 3 electoral votes to George Bush, does so by our CBS News estimates. So this is the way the map looks very quickly. As you can see, so many states in white there, the undecided ones, and that's what's going to decide the next president of the United States. Now, in the Senate, we started the evening with the Republicans having 51 vote majority in the U.S. Senate, 34 races up tonight. Of those 34 races, the Republicans needed 15 to retain control of the Senate. They already have won 11 by our CBS News estimate. They are well on their way not only to controlling the new Senate, but perhaps having a wider majority than they had before. But it's not over yet. The Democrats need to win in 22 of the 34 races. So far, we've estimated they've won 9. In states that had Senate races where the polls closed at 10 o'clock, this is the way things seem to have gone to us. In Iowa, Republican Senator Charles Grassley, we estimate, will be returned to the Senate from Iowa. That will be a hold on for the GOP. Nevada Senate race. Our CBS News information at the moment is we just don't have enough information. Now, this is the Senator Harry Reid is seeking a 4th term. It may not be close in Nevada, but it may be. We just don't have enough information to make even an estimate there as yet. Utah Senate. Our CBS News projection is that Senator Robert Bennett will be returned to the Senate. This is a hold on for the Republicans in Utah. So good news for the Republicans thus far in the Senate races. But Leslie Stahl, that Senate race in Florida, where the Democrats almost absolutely, positively, teetotally must have that race, has been out there a long time.
It's been out there a long time. Let's look at the tabulated vote. It's quite incredible how many of these races are close. This is one of those. You have Mel Martinez, the Republican. He was the housing secretary. The White House pressured him to run because they wanted him to help pump out the Hispanic vote. He's a Cuban American running against Betty Castor, the education commissioner. What's interesting and what we're seeing tonight, Dan, is that among Hispanic votes, Martinez is getting only just about 60% of the vote, but he's getting 5% better than the president is among Hispanics in that state. But look at that. That is the tabulated vote. It's about 77% of the precincts in, and look at that. It's dead even. Isn't that something? Anyway, that is one of the close ones, and so is Kentucky. Kentucky's got about 90% of the vote in, and it's still as close as you can be.
That's where the Republican incumbent Jim Bunning is trying to beat off that very strong challenge from Dr. Dan.
That's right. Now in Florida, Dan, the incumbent is a Democrat. It's Bob Graham, and that would be a turnover if the Dems don't hold on there.
Let's see how the race for the Senate goes. It's odds on the Republicans will retain control, perhaps with a greater majority than they had as the night started. If you remember, they controlled the Senate with 51 votes, but that's not yet assured. And this presidential race certainly is not assured. Let's check the map. 270 needed to win. 185 now, as we've put in by our CBS News projections. We've added in Montana and Utah to put President Bush at 185. Now you can hear, metaphorically at least, the Republicans drawing a deep breath, sort of 185, 270 needed to win. We're getting in maybe smelling distance. However, that won't happen until some of these states in white, particularly Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, they're in white because we have them in the undecided category, to say nothing of Wisconsin, Minnesota. Iowa now. Missouri's been out there for a long time. The Republicans were widely expected to carry Missouri. They may yet, but we still have it colored in white, as is the case with Arkansas. There's just so much up for grabs. Mika Brzezinski, we keep coming back to you. There's so much out on the map. You know, we certainly want to know what's going on, but we know we have to be careful.
Well, let's talk about Pennsylvania in that fact, Dan, because it's posing some issues in terms of being able to make a decision so far. We have data coming in from the exit polls that does not match up with the vote count data. And according to our decision desk here, the reason for that is there may be more absentee ballots coming in than expected. And here's the issue. Here's the problem with Pennsylvania. We have
Excuse me, Mika Brzezinski, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Arkansas, our CBS News estimate is when all the votes are in and counted, President Bush will get Arkansas 6 electoral votes, and that'll be whoopee news down in Texas and in the White House, because, as you know, former President Bill Clinton went into Arkansas trying to pull it out, what amounts to a series of three-point shots in basketball language, but they didn't go down. George Bush, our projection is, will carry Arkansas 6 electoral votes. So on our electoral map, that will, I think, put President Bush up by maybe 191. We'll just have to double check it. For right now, let's say 185, Kerry at 112. Mika, we'll come back to you in just a moment. But Bob, Arkansas, good news for the Republicans, because that will give them now a complete sweep of the South and all southern border states, as well as what we call the Heartland Midwest.
Well, and I think you pointed out, Dan, the Kerry campaign did not really think they had a chance in Arkansas. Bill Clinton said, wait a minute, let's back up here a minute. I think we can do some business down there. And he went down personally and campaigned. Well, it turned out the Kerry campaign was right after all. It went Republican. We're still, Dan, I mean, the only thing that has been called here tonight are the slam dunks. Everything that we expected to go to President Bush is gone to President Bush. Everything we expected to go to John Kerry has gone to Kerry. All of these battleground states where this election is going to be decided are still too close to call. We're no further along here now than we were 3 or 4 hours ago about having even a clue as to who's going to win this tonight.
One quick point, and that is that we say the states have gone to Bush and the states have gone to Kerry. You understand, folks, we project, we estimate, we, if you like to call it, is give you educated guesses. But we've said it time and again, nothing is final until all the votes are counted. You can make what you will of our estimates and projections. We're trying to be conservative, trying to not put anything in anybody's color, red or blue, until we're pretty confident it is true, but you'll have to make up your mind about our educated guesses. Now, in Pennsylvania, we haven't made even an uneducated guess in Pennsylvania. The polls have been closed there, most of them, for about 2 hours. And Mika Brzezinski, you were explaining why Pennsylvania has hung out there for so long and why it may be out there for a long time yet to come.
Well, the absentee ballot issue may be a problem for Pennsylvania, and it may cause a delay in a projection in Pennsylvania. The exit polling data that we have and the vote count data that we have don't match up. The reason may be that more absentee ballots may have been cast in Pennsylvania than expected. We do not have phone screening for absentee ballots in Pennsylvania because it was such a small percentage last time around. So we're going to have to hold the phone on Pennsylvania, Dan.
Thanks, Mika Brzezinski. Well, Ed Bradley, fair or unfair to say that if John Kerry doesn't carry Pennsylvania, it could be the equivalent of Death Valley for him.
Well, unless he then carries Florida and Ohio. I mean, but Pennsylvania is a state. I mean, the president put a lot into Pennsylvania. He was there during his presidency 50 times, 21 times in this last year. It was a state that they thought they could win, and the Kerry people have to win there.
Well, one of the battleground states we're watching closely is Ohio. A lot of people think it may yet come down to Ohio's 20 electoral votes. Cynthia Bowers is in Columbus. Cynthia, any idea when we will have enough information to at least make an estimate on Ohio?
It's hard to say, Dan, and here is why. One of the reasons why Ohio continues to defy colorization, if you will, as a red or blue state is the incredibly high voter turnout. As you can see by these pictures that attest to the incredible desire on the part of Ohioans to vote. Folks here are waiting in line in the rain, knowing it could be 4 or 5 hours, nearly midnight, before they cast a ballot. The Secretary of State predicts as many as 6 million of the state's 8 million voters will go to the polls today. And this is a state that Bush carried by only a small margin last time. Now, both sides tell us now, Dan, that despite all the litigation and concern about challengers being in the polling place, no trouble came of it. So state officials say if the only problem here is long lines, there's no problem. Dan?
Cynthia Bowers in Columbus, 270 needed to win. George Bush, we estimate, has 196. Now that CBS News has put Arkansas in his column, John Kerry with 112. Kerry obviously needs a rally, needs to rally from behind. There are plenty of states out there in which he can do that. I wouldn't say easily, but it could change suddenly. Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, not to mention Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa among them. You're watching CBS News election night coverage. Back at CBS News Election Central, our CBS News estimate is at this hour George Bush has nailed down by our projections 185 electoral votes. John Kerry 112 with 270 needed to win. We had a slight hitch in our giddy up earlier with a little glitch in the computer, but I underscore with you 185 is the CBS News estimate right now. Kerry at 112 with 270 needed to win. John Roberts, how do national voters rate the Bush presidency?
And as we look here for some of the stories that are emerging tonight, we wanted to check in to see whether or not this election was in fact a referendum on the incumbent president. Here's what we're finding in the exit polling data. 51% of voters who went to the polls today say they approve of the job that President Bush is doing. That's up a couple of points from the way it was in the days leading up to the election. Now, take a look at another number here. Is the country headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? Americans were pretty much split over that one. Here's an interesting figure, though, that we start to see a little bit of a story emerging. 46% of people said that they were either enthusiastic or satisfied about the Bush administration. But look at this number. 52% said they were either dissatisfied or angry. So there may be a protest vote story that's starting to develop here. Let's take a look at the figures from the Kerry vote and see if, in fact, that's true. 56% of people who voted for John Kerry said they were voting for the candidate. But look at this number. 38% said that they were registering a vote against President Bush. So the enthusiasm for the candidate is almost the same number as, a little bit different here, as the number of people who were not voting for John Kerry but against President Bush. We'll see how this trend develops throughout the night. Dan?
Thanks very much. Both camps quoted the Hispanic vote. Where are they? What were they big factors or not, Ed Bradley, or do we know enough to say?
No, I think they are big factors. Obviously in Florida, where the Cubans are a big factor, but not as big a factor as they have been in the past. I think the Cubans now are outnumbered by Hispanics from the Caribbean, from Central and South America, and other parts. But Bush is winning the president is winning among Hispanics in Florida. I think we could look out west and see where Hispanics are.
Excuse me, Ed, I want to interrupt you here. Our CBS News estimate is that you can now put Missouri's 11 electoral votes in the George Bush column, and that pops him up to 196 by our CBS News projections. So President Bush, our CBS News estimate now is that he, when all the votes are counted, will have carried Missouri. Remember, these are our projections, folks. You make your own judgments on how accurate in the end you think they have been. But with 270 needed to win, Bush with 196 is our current projection, Kerry with 112. The big states that will decide this remain what we call the 3-3-3. The big three, Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Florida with 27, Ohio with 20 electoral votes, Pennsylvania with 21, Michigan with 17, Wisconsin and Minnesota with 10 each, Iowa with 7, Colorado with 9, New Mexico with 5. Arizona is not yet in, and Nevada, which also has 5, they have the polls closed as well, but we do not yet know the results. In those states that are now in white, where the polls have closed, but we do not yet have them in columns for either man, are going to decide this election. The polls are still open, let me remind you, on the West Coast and also in Alaska and Hawaii, so if you haven't voted, go out there and be sure to vote. But in Missouri, the Republicans always thought that they were going to get it, Bob Schieffer, but the Democrats, they had it on their wish list, but it slid off.
They did, but about 3 weeks ago, the Kerry people pulled out, basically, and more or less said that they were going to turn it over to the Republicans. In the beginning, they thought they had a chance, but about 3 weeks ago, they thought it's about over, and so they pulled out the resources there. So again, Dan, what we're seeing, no surprise. What we thought was going to the Bush camp so far has gone to the Bush camp. What we thought was going to John Kerry so far has gone to John Kerry. What we thought would be the battleground states still too close to call.
You're watching CBS News election night coverage. Stay here with us. May be a long night. Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters. Ed Bradley, we were talking about the influence or lack of influence of the Hispanic vote.
Very big in Florida, obviously very big in California, but both camps know that California is pretty much a carry state. They concede that. But there are 4 states out west that are very important, and they have significant Hispanic populations. You take a look at the state of New Mexico, 32% of the voters there are Hispanic, and 57% of them are going for Senator Kerry. Colorado, which has about 9% Hispanic vote, Senator Kerry is picking up 70% of the vote there. In Arizona, where Hispanics make up 12% of the population, Senator Kerry is winning there again 58-42. And in Nevada, he's also doing well, winning 59-39%. Now, these are states with small numbers of electoral votes, but how important is New Mexico? More television ads in the Albuquerque-Santa Fe market last week, the last week of the campaign, than any other market in the country.
Ed Bradley on the Hispanic vote. Our CBS News estimate is George Bush has 196 of the 270 electoral votes needed to win. John Kerry with 112. You look at the map and you say, well, it looks, virtually all Bush. But keep in mind that John Kerry's staying in the hunt based on the foundation of having carried Illinois and New York State. Don't forget out west where the polls are still open. California with 55 big electoral votes is widely expected to go to Kerry. We'll see. Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters. Stay here with us. It's 10:30 in the east, 7:30 in the west. President Bush leads Senator Kerry in the battle for electoral votes, according to our CBS News projections. But put on another cup of coffee. This race is far from over. We may all be in the waiting room for quite a while yet. No winners yet in the 12 states with 145 electoral votes, and the polls are still open in 6 states with 84 votes. In sum, with 270 electoral votes needed to win, President Bush still needs to pick up 74 more. Senator Kerry needs 158 more. Kerry could get a third of that from California, where the polls are still open. Now, here's the national popular vote total. President Bush has led from the opening pop tonight. Right now, it's running on the order of 51% to 48%. That's been closing down as more votes get in and counted. We now have something on the order of about 49 or 50 million votes counted, with over 105 million expected to be cast. Let's go to the map. Bush states in red, Kerry states in blue, according to our CBS News estimates. You look at the map and you say, well, it must be all over. Looks like it's going to be George Bush. But here's one of those cases where your mother was right. Looks can be deceiving. President Bush is clearly off to a good start. We estimate he has 196 electoral votes, having swept the South and all southern border states, also run through the Midwest and making real inroads in the West. However, John Kerry, by our estimate, carrying New York and Illinois, that's the foundation of his staying in the hunt. He has 112. Keep in mind, out in the West, that a lot of people think that John Kerry is virtually a cinch to get California's 55 electoral votes. We'll have to see, but that alone, of course, could put him up within shouting distance of Bush. And with Washington State having 11, Oregon 7, should carry the whole Pacific Coast, he would very much be in it. But we keep coming back to it. If you've been with us all night, you say, oh, man, don't tell me 3, 3, and 3 again. We're going to do that. It's Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania is the big 3. The middle 3, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, and our little 3 being New Mexico, Hawaii, and New Hampshire as the states. Those 9 may very well decide it, and we don't have decisions in any of them yet. Arizona Senator John McCain is with us in Phoenix. Congratulations on what we estimate to be your victory tonight, Senator, elected to your 4th term.
Thank you, Dan. I always believe you.
Well, and if you believe that, folks, you believe rocks can grow. But
thanks, Dan.
Bitter contest. Can the country unite behind a winner, whomever it may be?
I think we have to, and I think that the tone will be set by President Bush starting tomorrow, that we have to work together. We have too many challenges. The enemy is not the Democrats. The enemy is al-Qaeda. The enemy is the terrorists. And the Democrats are not our enemy. They're our friends. And we have to work together, and we have to face this transcendent challenge of our generation. I believe that there will be a willingness to do that because the American people expect it. And frankly, Washington isn't a very pleasant place to work lately.
Senator McCain, after record spending in this presidential contest, do you think that the campaign spending reform bill, which you were so key in getting passed, actually worked?
Well, I think it did several things. One is we had more small donors than any time in history. The parties were certainly had their power enhanced, both at the national and state and local level. Overall good. The problem, of course, is the 527s that are in violation of not McCain-Feingold, but of the previous campaign finance reform law of '74. And what we have is we have a Federal Election Commission that refuses to enforce the law. It's a dysfunctional organization led by political apparatchiks, and we're in court. President Bush is in court with them. We will prevail, but we're going to have to reform the Federal Election Commission, which has opened these spigots in the first place.
You think there'll be elections in Iraq in January or postponed, Senator?
I believe we will have elections in Iraq, and they may be very difficult, but I think we were able to do it in Afghanistan, and I believe we'll be able to do it in Iraq. And the sooner the Iraqi people believe they govern themselves, the better off we're going to be.
Whomever is elected president, likely or unlikely to have, by and large, U.S. troops out of Iraq by the end of next year?
No matter who is elected, he will not have them out. They will be there for a long time. The key is to keep our casualties down and eliminate those, train the military of Iraq and their police, and withdraw to our bases and only be used when necessary. We've had troops in Kosovo and Bosnia and South Korea, a lot of places. The key is casualties, and that's what we have to get a hold of. It's going to be tough. It's going to be long, it's going to be hard, it's going to be expensive. Consequences of failure are devastating. Benefits of success are enormous.
Senator, you say the American people deserve a government that will work together, but how does Congress break the deadlock? Particularly, let's say that if President Bush should win and the Republicans remain in control of the Senate and the Congress, how's the deadlock going to get broken?
Well, we're going to have to, all of us sit down, and obviously the president will have to reach out. That's one of the benefits of victory and one of his obligations as well. We all know that you can't pass legislation without 60 votes in the Senate. And look, the Democrats are as tired of this partisanship as Republicans are, and we want to do something for the American people. We've got to reduce the deficit. We need immigration reform. We're going to have to address Social Security, and we're going to have to stop this this pork barrel spending. And there's a lot. I believe that the men and women I serve were honorable people, and they go to Washington to get something done, not to just fight with each other.
Senator John McCain, Arizona, again, congratulations on what we estimate will be your victory tonight in the Senate. Thanks for being with us. Good luck. We'll see you along the trail.
Thanks, Dan.
Anthony Mason's in Miami. 4 years ago at about this hour, problems arose in the Florida count. How about this year? Anthony, Florida is still out there with its 27 electoral votes.
Dan, as you say, it was at just about this hour 4 years ago that problems with vote counting first became apparent here in Florida. Reports began trickling in from Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties that something was amiss. And those problems resulted in a 35-day stalemate over who won the election. That, as they say, is history. As for today, we've just heard from Florida's Secretary of State, who is a Republican-appointed Secretary of State, that there have been very few voting problems today. One lawsuit has been filed over the mailing of absentee ballots, but the Secretary of State says the voting reforms have succeeded and the vote count is progressing. That does not mean that we're going to know anytime soon who won the state's 27 electoral votes, but it will probably be before Thanksgiving this time. However, we have just heard from Miami-Dade County that they have so many absentee ballots, 94,000, twice as many as 4 years ago, that they think it will take them at least until tomorrow to count them all. And of course, they could be critical in the swing state of Florida, Dan.
Absolutely, Anthony Mason. 270 needed to win. We estimate, we've hung on this for a few minutes. Once we decided Oh, and our CBS News estimate that Missouri could be colored red for George Bush. George Bush has 196 of the 270 electoral votes needed to win. John Kerry has 112. But we were making the point, and we'll make it again, that looks can be deceiving, that while so many states are colored in red, you can say, well, it's a runaway for George Bush. It may wind up being a runaway for George Bush, but this is the point, it is not yet. There's still enough states out there, particularly the big ones, Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and then the middle ones, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and even some of the smaller ones, New Mexico with 5. Nevada's votes are still out with 5. Colorado's 9 have been out there for a long while. There is plenty of room here for John Kerry to come from behind, but you can say, well, if he's going to do it, he's going to have to hurry. But there's been very little hurried about this race so far. Jim Axelrod at Kerry headquarters in Boston. Florida hasn't dropped. What does the Kerry camp really think is going on down there?
Well, you know, a little earlier this evening, Dan, it was getting a bit tough to get information out of the Kerry camp. There was a news blackout, if you will, and it turns out there was a fairly decent reason for that. Amidst all the nervousness and anxiety and tension and nail-biting, Senator Kerry had taken a nap, which I guess goes to prove not everybody's metabolism and pulse runs at the same rate. But he does pay some people to worry for him. And here's what we're hearing from senior Kerry aides, specifically about Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Whereas they were expressing much more confidence earlier in the evening and late afternoon based on turnout, we are now told by a senior Kerry aide that they are feeling confident only about Pennsylvania, not Ohio nor Florida. Similarly, Dan, there is the other critical Midwestern group of states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. Minnesota and Wisconsin, the Kerry camp is feeling confident about. Iowa, a little bit more of a question mark right now. Dan?
Well, if the Kerry camp, as you pointed out, Jim Axelrod, is saying, well, that it's not quite so sure about Ohio anymore, who knows on what they're basing that. But let's point out the following. We said it as the evening started, that of the big 3, Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, that John Kerry would probably need to win 2 of those 3 in order to bring home a victory. And that, with Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Florida, all 3 still out, the news from inside the Kerry camp, it's not discouraging yet, but not nearly as encouraging as it was early in the evening. Now, for the other side, let's go to Bill Plant at the White House. How does the Bush camp feel about Florida, Bill?
Well, Dan, it's interesting because what we're hearing here mirrors what we just heard from Mr. Axelrod down in Florida, and that means the spin may actually be closer to accurate this time than usual. They say they're winning Florida. They cite good gains in Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade counties, and they say that that's even without the Panhandle, which they carried 2-1 the last time. I once asked one of the senior aides why they were campaigning there if they carried it 2-1. I said, you want 3-1? No, he said just 2.5. They know their numbers. And interestingly enough, they say that they're not doing well in Pennsylvania, just as the Kerry folks indicated. Ohio, the Bush people think they have a good chance. Now, the president did something very unusual tonight. He invited the press pool up to take a look around and see him with his family in the living quarters. And he said this.
Don't let him come any closer. Come here, Barney. Barney. How's it going, Mr. President? We're very upbeat, thank you.
We're going to get a winner tonight?
I believe I will win. Thank you very much. I feel good about it. I'm glad to be able to watch the returns here with my family and friends, and it's going to be an exciting evening.
Now, you got to remember the timing of that just about an hour ago was while polls were still open out west, and they still are trying to get people out to vote. That was a little bit of cheering from the commander-in-chief. Dan?
Bill Plant reporting live from the White House, where spirits seem to be on the incline. And as Jim Axelrod reported from Boston, that spirits in the Kerry camp are stasis, maybe a bit on the decline, but all of that is working around the margins. Here's the central point. Who will be the next president of the United States has not been decided, and it may not be decided for a long while yet because so many of the bigger, more important electoral states where it's said to be close have yet to be decided. Now, Bob Sheaver, let's call a television timeout for 1 second. The chances of this winding up 269 to 269, dead even.
It could happen. I don't think it's going to happen, but it could happen. And when Jim Axelrod talks about the Kerry people not feeling as good about Ohio That probably would be the key, because if George Bush should win both Florida and Ohio, and if everything else goes as we think it is going to go, but then he comes along and loses Little New Hampshire and Nevada, it would wind up 269 electoral votes to 269 electoral votes. A tie could happen. I think the way it would probably happen is if George Bush wins both Florida and Ohio, but then loses those two smaller states, New Hampshire and Nevada.
Well, while underscoring no one expects it to end in a flat 269-269 tie, if it does that, it goes directly, that final, it goes directly to the House of Representatives. It would be decided in the House, and since the Republicans control the House, that would mean a George Bush victory probably, but we're well ahead of ourselves. Right now, our CBS News estimate is George Bush 196, John Kerry 112 with 270 needed to win. Stay in here with us for CBS News election night coverage. Polls been closed in the Wisconsin for quite some time. We're not in a position to say how we think it's going to go. With Iowa, it looks like it's going to be well into the day tomorrow, given the machine problems, quote unquote, that they had. New Mexico with 5 electoral votes, Nevada with 5, and Hawaii with 4, also in the yet to be settled category as far as our CBS News projections are concerned. Now we're going to take a slight break here in a moment to let some stations who may have been away rejoin us. Don't go away. We'll be right back. It's the morning after Election Day, but it ain't over till it's over, and it ain't over yet. Michigan has just slid into the Kerry column by our estimate. That, by our projections, give the senator 238 electoral votes. President Bush, with 249, by our estimate, is just 21 electoral votes shy of re-election, but that could prove to be, please underscore the word, could prove to be a very tough 21 to get. Standing in President Bush's way, among other things, but primarily Ohio. If he could win Ohio, he'd be there. But it's uncertain at this hour when anybody's going to know how Ohio's gone. Now, you may be saying, well, listen, I saw someplace else somebody had Ohio in President Bush's category. They're entitled to do that, but we say again, we said coming into tonight, we'd rather be last than be wrong. We don't want to be wrong about Ohio. If it takes a day or more to settle Ohio, so be it. Our position is that we just don't feel comfortable estimating it at this moment. Now, let's add them up. With 270 electoral votes needed to win, our estimate is that President Bush has 249, Kerry has 238, 270 needed to win. The states in white are where the polls have closed. The polls have closed everywhere now, but where we have not projected a winner as yet. Ohio, the big one, with 20 electoral votes. Wisconsin with 10. Iowa with 7. Look out on Iowa because, as Mika Brzezinski and Ed Bradley have been saying, looks like Iowa has machine problems. Aren't going to know how those 7 electoral votes go until sometime at least fairly deep into tomorrow. New Mexico, which went for Gore the last time by a paper-thin margin, 5 electoral votes there. President Bush might wind up carrying it. Who can say? Nevada, which President Bush carried the last time, 5 electoral votes. The Democrats like to think they have a chance there. Out in Hawaii, 4 electoral votes. We still have it in the white, meaning we can't estimate, not going to estimate how it's going to go. The Republicans like to think that they have a chance there. Now, in the race to control the Senate, some time ago, Leslie Stahl has said, well, listen, the Republicans are definitely going to control the next Senate. It's only a question by how many are they going to votes they're going to have control. The Republicans will control the House of Representatives. By how many seats? Unclear. One guess, and it's a guess, maybe 24 or 30 seats. We'll just have to see. I want to show you something on the reporter's notebook because it may put things in some perspective for you. We keep writing down on our pad over here, my old reporter's notepad, well, okay, Ohio. And that's pretty much where things are. However, on this electronic gadget which they've given me here, Bush needs 21, Kerry needs 32. Now, follow me through here, because if John Kerry should wind up carrying Ohio's 20 electoral votes. If in the end Ohio gets colored blue, George Bush could still win the election. He could still win. He would need, George Bush would need then, to pick up Wisconsin with 10 electoral votes, Iowa with 7, and then George Bush would need to carry either New Mexico and its 5 or Nevada and its 5. So George Bush is in the position that even if he loses Ohio, there is a way. A lot of people say, well, it's not very likely he's going to win Wisconsin and Ohio and then pick up either Nevada or New Mexico, but it's possible. George Bush could lose Ohio's 20 electoral votes and still win. For John Kerry, just not going to happen. If he doesn't win Ohio, that's the reason that the Kerry people are so fixed on Ohio. So that's one way of looking at the race so far. Jim Axelrod in Boston at Kerry headquarters has more on John Edwards' appearance there some minutes ago. One thing, Jim Axelrod, you know, we didn't see as much of John Edwards during the campaign or during this election day as a lot of people thought we were. The Republicans sort of taunted him by saying if he doesn't show up soon, we're going to put his picture on milk cartons so we can find him. But he's the man they send out tonight to carry their heavy wood for them.
Yeah, and in 1 minute and 17 seconds, Dan, he may have just absolutely said the most important thing that anyone said all night as far as the candidates go. I want to review for you when he was saying it's been a long night, waited 4 years for the victory, we can wait one more night. Essentially, you've heard the phrase, the generals are always fighting the last war. Well, politicians do that as well. He was clearly staking out ground in the event that this thing will then move to the courts. And as he concluded his comments, he said, we have said clearly along every step of this campaign, every vote would count and every vote would be counted. Again, Dan, 1 minute and 17 seconds by my clock from the minute he walked out on stage to the minute he walked off. But he said everything he needed to in terms of staking out the turf that the Kerry Edwards campaign will guard jealously if that's their last hope to win. Dan?
Jim Axelrod live in Boston. We go to Wyatt Andrews, CBS News correspondent in Washington, who's with some of the voices and some of the loud talk coming from the Republicans down the headquarters down there. Wyatt, what have you learned? What are you hearing?
Dan, just a few minutes ago, we got confirmation that Republicans think they have this election. Ed Gillespie, who is the chairman of the Republican National Committee, came out a few minutes ago to explain the math as the Republicans see it. He said they believe that they have, President Bush has a 123,000 vote lead in Ohio. And he said there are 130,000 provisional ballots out there.
Excuse me, Wyatt Andrews, I have to interrupt you here because our CBS News estimate is that John Kerry, when all the votes are encountered, will have carried Hawaii and gotten Hawaii's 4 electoral votes. You recall that Vice President Dick Cheney flew out to Hawaii hoping to turn what has generally speaking been a Democratic bastion of support in presidential elections Republicans' way, not going to be. Now, the significance is that moves in our estimates John Kerry up to 242, George Bush with 249, with 270 needed to win. Now, you know, if this thing gets any closer, somebody's going to have to call 911, call the police, call a nurse, call somebody, because it's, 19 minutes before 3 o'clock in the morning here in New York, and everybody's focused down on Ohio, but as states like Hawaii drop into Kerry's column, Kerry is creeping up on George Bush. Still advantage Bush, any way you cut it. Better likelihood that Bush will wind up winning than Kerry, but as Wyatt Andrews is reporting from Washington, the Republicans have already done their arithmetic, and they believe they have it won. Wyatt, pick it up from there again, please.
Dan, I was just about to explain, they think that of those 130,000 provisional ballots, Ed Gillespie, chairman of the Republican National Committee, claims that probably only 30,000 of those will be actual valid votes. So they think they have Ohio. That gives them, in their minds, 269, and they are waiting in this hall for one more state that would, in their minds, ice the election.
Well, they could get that one more state provided. Thank you, Wyatt. They could get that one more state. Wyatt Andrews is saying, well, the Republicans are saying, listen, we've got Ohio. Provisional ballots or no provisional ballots, they have their own mathematical equation. You can bet the Democrats have theirs. Look, there's a lot of gaming going on here now to get public perception, to get the strongest image of who's won the election, and this is bound to go on well into tomorrow. But follow it through here. The Republicans are saying, listen, we've got Ohio. And when it's settled that we get Ohio provisional ballots or not, that will put us at 269. And they believe we can get the votes to put them over the 270 mark by getting either New Mexico's 5 or Nevada's 5 or possibly Iowa's 7. Iowa's had machine problems. Again, not likely to know how Iowa's going to go until at least well into tomorrow. And, of course, Wisconsin's 10 are still out there. So that's the reason that the Republicans profess to be as confident as they appear to be about why they're going to win the election. Bob Schieffer.
I just got off the phone with the White House, Dan. They are absolutely confident that they have won. They say in Ohio, 97% of the vote by their count is in. They say they have a 126,000 vote lead there. They say it's now down to nickels and dimes. I ask about, well, what about this 130,000 provisional ballots that are out there? They say with the lead they have, that every one of those ballots would have to be accepted and every one would have to be for Kerry if they were to be, if they were to count. They say just flatly they have won. If they were to count, they say just flatly they have won. Now, they also say that they believe they're almost certain they're going to win New Mexico. They say they have a big lead out there by their count. They also say that at the end of the night that Nevada will go their way. I'm reporting what they told me, and they are absolutely confident that they've won Ohio. They say the victory will come either when the results from New Mexico come in or when the results from Nevada come in.
Well, hope is sometimes father of the wish. Who can say? We'll be back with our CBS News election coverage in just a few moments. Back at CBS News election headquarters with 270 electoral votes needed to win. Our estimate is Kerry has 242. That includes a turnover for the Democrats, a pickup, if you will, in New Hampshire by our estimate, and we estimate that George Bush has 249. Now, the White House is selling hard, saying they're absolutely convinced that they have won the election, and here's their reasoning. Whether you choose to believe it or not, whether you think it's spin or not, here's what the White House, the George Bush campaign headquarters people at the highest levels say. They say that in Ohio, 20 electoral votes there, everybody agrees that John Kerry cannot win if he doesn't carry Ohio. That is the Republicans' contention that with these votes actually in and counted, that George Bush has enough of a lead over John Kerry, over 100,000 vote lead, well over 100,000 vote lead over John Kerry, that with maybe 175 provisional ballots, that's the outside number, it's followed through here, that the White House Bush campaign argument is that John Kerry would have to get virtually all of the provisional ballots in order to even come within shouting distance of George Bush, and that goes their reasoning is why they are so confident, quote unquote, that they're going to win. Again, take it for whatever it may be. On the other side, the John Kerry people, John Edwards, the vice president nominee, coming out and saying, you know, whoa, hold it. We said going in that every vote was going to count, and we will make sure that every vote gets counted. Their whole focus is on Ohio, and those provisional ballots by law, as we understand it, we could be corrected, but John Turley, who doesn't miss much, says those provisional ballots in Ohio cannot even be counted for at least 8 or 10 days. Now, Ohio isn't the only state with provisional ballots. We're going to go to Anthony Mason in a minute to get him to tell us about what's happening in some other states. But right now, Ed Bradley, you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, here are the numbers. I mean, if there are 175,000 provisional ballots out there, and the Kerry people are saying that most of them come from black wards in Cincinnati and Cleveland, and they think they can get 75 to 85% of those votes. If they get 75% of them, that's 131,000 votes. So that's enough to put them back in the ball game. Here's where the White House's optimism comes in other states. In Nevada, 80% of the vote is counted. Bush has a 13,000 vote lead. New Mexico, 94% of the vote counted, the president leading by 30,000 votes. In Iowa, 97% counted, and Bush has an 11,500 vote lead.
Well, that would be the reason the White House says that we're confident we're going to win it. However, let's pull back here again. take a little breath. We try to deal with what we consider to be the best available information. You understand that Karl Rove, and by the way, it should be noted, whatever you think of Karl Rove, that the road is littered with the carcasses of people's reputations who said, well, Karl Rove doesn't know what he's talking about. He frequently does know what he's talking about. However, Karl Rove and the others are making this argument that, look, any way you cut it, the election is over. You can choose to believe that or not. Now, you mentioned Nevada, Bradley. Anthony Mason points out that Nevada is another state with provisional ballots. The question, Anthony, is, are there enough provisional ballots out there to make a big difference?
Well, Dan, we'll have to see, of course, by the end of the night what the final total is. In Nevada, which has been very close all night, Bush has pulled away a little bit here. But there are an estimated 3,200 provisional ballots just in Clark County alone. That's where Las Vegas is located. Now, they could become the target of a legal battle over Nevada's 5 electoral votes if there was to be a second front here in any effect in terms of legal challenges. Now, Bush carried this state in 2000 by about 7,000 votes. And the way the electoral math is coming down with the Democrats, with John Edwards saying they plan to fight over every vote, as I say, this could become a second front possibly in the battle to get 270 or more electoral votes, Dan.
The second front possibly, conceivably, being in Nevada, where they do have a considerable number of provisional ballots given the total number of votes cast. Well, again, let's pause. Advantage George Bush, clearly. 249 electoral votes we estimate he has. John Kerry with 242, 270 needed to win. However, with Ohio being the principal battleground, you've heard the Karl Rove, George W. Bush campaign argument of why they think that Ohio is what in political terms we call a gut cinch for them. We'll have to see. Wisconsin with 10 electoral votes is still out. Iowa's had machine problems, 7 electoral votes. But in the actual votes counted last time I looked, correct me if I'm wrong here, Bob, I believe that George Bush was leading in Iowa. Now, in actual votes counted, Bush is also leading in New Mexico with 5 and Nevada with 5. That's one advantage Bush, but it's not over. That's where things stand. We'll have more for you after we take this break on these CBS stations. Dan Rather at CBS News Election News Headquarters in New York with Ed Bradley, Bob Schieffer, Leslie Stahl, Mika Brzezinski, and John Roberts. Stay right here with us. Keep it where it is. We'll be right back with you. Back at CBS News Election News Headquarters in New York. In football terms, you might say that for George Bush, it's first and goal from a yard out. Sometimes that turns out to be a very tough yard. With the states hanging out there, Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa, New Mexico, and Nevada. That if George Bush carries Ohio, that's it. If John Kerry in the end, and keep in mind again, it may be some days before we can say with any certainty who has carried Ohio. Yes, people can estimate it one way or the other, but we learned from our experience in Florida the last time out that we're going to be very, very careful when states get in contention as Ohio is now. It's a somewhat different situation in Florida the last time, but it's similar in this regard that lawyers are swarming over Ohio like locusts. And there are going to be more of them tomorrow and more of them the day after. So when that begins to happen, you know, who knows how it's going to go out. But I come back to the point that George Bush could win even if he doesn't wind up carrying Ohio. Keep in mind they're absolutely teetotally, me-mortally convinced they're going to carry Ohio, but if they don't, George Bush could still win by getting Wisconsin and Iowa and either Nevada or New Mexico. So that's pretty much where things stand at the moment. Leslie Stahl, what about that South Dakota Senate race? Any decision there yet? Tom Daschle and Thune?
It's just like the presidential race. I call it the OBR, the other big race, and it's 6 hours after the polls close. We cannot tell you, we cannot predict who's going to win. Look at that. 94% of the precincts in. John Thune, the former Republican congressman, has a slight lead in the tabulated vote, but we are not ready to say which candidate's going to win. And it's incredible because George Bush we believe is going to carry South Dakota by 61%, so that's a pretty enormous tide that Tom Daschle is fighting against. Of course, he has been in Congress half his life. He is the Senate leader of the Democrats, so that's not so surprising. Let me tell you also about Florida. We haven't had a result in Florida.
That's for the Democratic seat being vacated by Bob Graham, who's retiring.
Exactly. And what you have in that state is a situation where Mel Martinez, who the White House leaned on and pressured to run because they thought he's a Hispanic, they thought he would pump up the Hispanic vote to help President Bush. But Betty Castor, the former state education commissioner and a college president, is giving him one hell of a run, and we are not prepared at this point to say what's going to happen there. Bob Graham, very popular, campaigned with Betty Castor, and that may have helped her chances, and we just don't know. There's one other Senate race still outstanding that's up in Alaska. The Republican incumbent, Lisa Murkowski, looks by the tabulated vote with 64% of the precincts in to have a comfortable lead, but we are not prepared yet to say whether she will hold on to her seat against Tony Knowles, the former governor. She got into a lot of trouble because her father appointed her to that seat, and people in the state didn't like that. She has these people in the state didn't like that. She has these lawn signs with her name, Lisa, this big, and Murkowski that big, so you can't, people can't be reminded that Murkowski, her father, the governor, who has become quite unpopular, put her in the seat.
Alaska, South Dakota, and Florida unsolved in the Senate races, but the Republicans will definitely control the Senate next time. Only question I made. Let me show you some votes actually in and counted after we tap the map once again. 207 needed to win. We estimate George Bush has 249, Kerry 242. The states in white, we have not estimated either way, Ohio being the big one, 20 electoral votes there. If John Kerry wins that one, he's in the hunt. If he loses it, say goodbye. In Iowa, this is the votes in and counted in Iowa. They've had machine trouble in Iowa. We've mentioned several times, means that we aren't going to really know how Iowa turns out until tomorrow, but 98% of the precincts in and reporting. That's the way the actual vote count looks. Out in Nevada, Anthony Mason mentioned that George Bush has opened up a bit of a lead in Nevada, perhaps enough to win the 5 electoral votes out there. That's with 82 of the precincts reporting. But cautionary note, those provisional ballots, which may become the chads of this election year, provisional ballots could be a factor in Nevada. In New Mexico, land of enchantment is a land of mystery tonight, 5 electoral votes. Nobody knows how it's going to go, but again, George Bush has a lead over John Kerry, and in the votes in and counted with 96% of the precincts in, that lead has been increasing somewhat. In Wisconsin, and the Badger State, 10 electoral votes frequently goes the way Minnesota's gone, and we think Minnesota's gone to Kerry. Kerry leads in Minnesota with 92% of the precincts in and their votes counted. That's the way it looks. In Ohio, the big one of the evening, with its 20 electoral votes, this is the way the votes in and counted looks at the moment. George Bush with 98% of the precincts in and counted leads in Ohio, but remember that they believe that there are maybe 175,000 provisional ballots in Ohio which can't be counted for 8 or 10 days. Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York. We'll talk to you in a few minutes. Well,
And the word is in just now. We want to go right to Bill Plant, who is at the White House. The word is from the White House that John Kerry has called President Bush and has conceded this election. Bill, what do you know?
White House tells us, Harry, that John Kerry called President Bush within the last few minutes to concede the election. It is now officially over. The White House had been holding off all morning on scheduling an appearance for the president. They said last night that Mr. Bush would appear to claim victory even in the absence of a Kerry concession, because, the White House said, he had the votes, and it was numerically impossible for Kerry to overtake him in Ohio. So they waited, perhaps playing a little bit of a game here. They waited until they heard from the Kerry people, and now they have. We are told by the White House that John Kerry called the president within the last few minutes to concede the election. Harry?
Here's the story for people who may just be joining us now, because, of course, the whole dispute was all about Ohio, these provisional votes that many in the Democratic side wanted to have counted. There was a lead in the overall vote count of more than 100,000. And what Andrew Card said early this morning, about 5:40, 5:45 this morning, was that it was a literal mathematic impossibility to overcome the vote lead in Ohio with those provisional votes. And now we're understanding that the Kerry camp has said, we're not going to fight this fight. We're not going to bring lawyers in. We're not going to open up all of those envelopes and count them one at a time. We are going to concede this election. And President Bush has, in fact, been reelected to a 4-year term. Bill?
Harry, that's right. The White House has said from the beginning that the president hoped, in fact, he said it himself yesterday, that the election would be over last night. Well, it wasn't quite, but it now does appear to be over definitively this morning. They maintained when Secretary Card, the chief of staff, came to what was to have been the Bush victory celebration at 5:45 this morning, with people rolled up on the floor sleeping, waiting for the party to start. They've maintained that it was mathematically impossible for John Kerry to overtake President Bush in Ohio because of the number of votes that they said the president had versus the number of disputed ballots that were out there. And they tried to create an air of inevitability. The strategy here was obviously for the president to act legitimate from the beginning and to create this air of inevitability so that whatever happened, the president could claim and go on acting, doing his business as though he were the president without waiting for this to be resolved. And now it has been, because John Kerry has called the president, we are told, and conceded.
All right, Bill Plant, live at the White House this morning. Thank you very much.
President Bush celebrates a strong re-election victory. We'll tell you how he did it. Senator Kerry, gracious in defeat, left to ponder what went wrong. Moral values. We'll give you a look at the surprise issue that trumped the war, terror, and the economy as the decisive issue in the election, and how the U.S. Supreme Court and the Bush cabinet are likely to change in the next 4 years.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting tonight from CBS News election headquarters in New York.
Good evening. For a time there, it looked like we were in for another long post-election battle for the White House. But today, when Ohio finally went into the Bush column, it was clear the president had scored a decisive re-election victory. With decisions now everywhere but Iowa, CBS News estimates the president won at least 30 states and 279 electoral votes. Senator Kerry, 19 states, 252 electoral votes. Mr. Bush also won more popular votes than any presidential candidate in history. 3.5 million more than Senator Kerry. So how did he do it in a nation so divided, in a race that seemed so close? CBS's John Roberts begins our coverage.
After another roller coaster night and an uncertain morning, President Bush this afternoon declared victory.
We had a long night and a great night.
While the margins in many states were tight, it was a significant win. The first presidential candidate to take more than 50% of the popular vote since his father did it in 1988.
America has spoken, and I'm humbled by the trust and the confidence of my fellow citizens.
The president's re-election playbook brought home a second term. His opposition to same-sex marriage, abortion, and destroying embryos for stem cell research made moral values a top issue, drawing out many Christian conservatives who stayed home in 2000. He increased his support among women concerned with family values and whittled down the Democrats' advantage with Hispanic voters. President Bush fielded the concession call from John Kerry just after 11 this morning. Mr. Bush told Kerry he was an admirable and worthy opponent and that he waged one tough campaign. When asked if the two could work together after such a divisive campaign, the president's press secretary insisted absolutely. And Mr. Bush reached out to Democrats to put divisions behind them.
To make this nation stronger and better, I will need your support, and I will work to earn it.
But with solid majorities in Congress, President Bush now has the legislative muscle to get his proposals on tax cuts, health care, and Social Security reform through without a lot of help from Democrats. Aides say the president sees his victory as a clear mandate and plans to move aggressively on his agenda for a second term. The most urgent task will be to put Iraq squarely on the path to democracy. The war was one of the president's biggest liabilities in the election. And last week's bin Laden videotape was a sharp reminder to President Bush that he'll begin a second term with important work from the first still undone.
White House officials today played down the depth of the divide in America, though they did acknowledge the president has some distance to go to bring the country back together. But before he gets busy on that, he's going to take a little downtime at Camp David to rest up from the long campaign. Dan?
John Roberts reporting live from the White House. After vowing to fight for every vote in Ohio, the Kerry campaign did the math and decided there was no way the senator could win. Kerry telephoned the president. Then, as CBS's Jim Axelrod reports, Senator Kerry addressed his supporters.
To say goodbye, John Kerry returned to the place he first said hello. Boston's Faneuil Hall, where he declared his candidacy 14 months ago.
I wish that I could just wrap you up in my arms and embrace each and every one of you individually all across this nation. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
For a man often called aloof, it was a warm and poignant farewell, leaving his supporters outside with moist eyes, but with no question why he was conceding.
The outcome should be decided by voters, not a protracted legal process.
In the half dozen hours between this declaration from John Edwards early this morning,
that in this election, every vote would count and every vote would be counted.
And the concession later.
You can be disappointed, but you cannot walk away. This fight has just begun.
Kerry campaign aides analyzed Ohio and decided it could not be won. They made the case to Kerry at 8 a.m. He met with Edwards at 10. He phoned the president at 11. And it was over.
That you have taught me and you've tested me and you've lifted me up and you've made me stronger.
John Kerry will return to Washington, where he still has 4 years left in his 4th Senate term. But this afternoon, he promised it'll be a new man sliding behind his old desk.
I know your struggles. I know your hopes. They are part of me now. And I will never forget you, and I'll never stop fighting for you.
Senator Kerry left the national stage with this, quoting, "There are no losers in American elections because even if our candidate loses, we still wake up the next morning Americans." And that's a thought even the senator's harshest critics would have a hard time picking apart. Dan?
Jim Axelrod reporting live from Boston. Thanks, Jim. An estimated 120 million Americans voted in this election, the highest number ever. There were many issues that motivated people to go to the polls. CBS's Lee Cowan reports on the #1 issue.
In the end, it wasn't the clatter of the war. It wasn't the thud of the economy. It wasn't even the rantings of the world's most wanted terrorist. In the end, what voters say brought them to the polls was much more quiet. The #1 voter motivator, morality.
America's gone downhill morally, period.
National exit polls showed that 22% of voters claimed moral values was their chief concern, more than those who list the economy or terrorism.
My moral stance and my position will always override any other issues.
It had been a strategy of the Bush camp all along. Instead of reaching out to undecided voters,
this is the very first time that I have felt that God was in the White House.
Thank you.
The president courted his predominantly white evangelical base, and it worked.
Bush lost the popular vote in 2000 because 3 or 4 million fundamentalist Christians stayed home. Well, guess what? They turned up in 2004.
I do. And he got more help than he bargained for after the mayor of San Francisco began allowing same-sex marriages. It produced such an uproar among conservatives, 11 states put a constitutional amendment on their ballot to ban same-sex marriages. It pulled conservatives to the polls in droves, and the bans passed in all 11 states.
George W. Bush is the inheritor of the Reagan conservative movement on social and cultural issues,
Which has Democrats concerned, not because morals are making headlines, but because morals, some say, are being used.
What this campaign played on were the politics of fear and the politics of scarcity and the politics of good and evil.
For those who thought morality was a sleeper issue during the campaign, most analysts agree it will not be that way during a second term. Supreme Court nominations could soon take center stage. And for conservatives, the highest voter turnout in decades could be an answer to their prayers. Lee Cowan, CBS News, Cleveland.
As we noted, it was Ohio, a state Senator Kerry thought to the end he could win, that finally gave President Bush his victory. The red areas went for the president in Ohio, the blue for Kerry. You can see the senator won only in the big cities. It wasn't enough. CBS's Cynthia Bowers reports how Kerry got bucked by the Buckeye state.
That Ohio would come down to the wire was no surprise, but how it got there was another matter entirely.
Open your ballot booklet.
As if sensing their starring role on the national stage, voters here responded in record numbers. 5.5 million people jammed the polls, voting into the wee hours because lines at some precincts stretched for blocks. Conventional wisdom says heavy turnout favors Democrats. Well, that got turned on its ear when Ohio Republicans turned out their faithful in droves. They admit it was no easy task.
And then in the last 72 hours, we moved heaven and earth to turn them out.
By the end of the night, John Kerry's campaign hopes were hanging by the thinnest of threads. He trailed Mr. Bush by more than 130,000 votes, but there was still a large number of provisional ballots to be counted, ballots cast by people who didn't appear on regular voter rolls.
Thank you for voting.
But as the hours ticked by, the numbers just didn't add up for Kerry. He would need virtually every one of those uncounted votes to win, and almost no one believed that was likely.
Those provisional ballots that come in are going to be all over the map. They're not just going to be in one camp or another.
Another notable development, despite all the time and energy Kerry spent trying to woo the youth vote, the effort here never seemed to strike the right chords.
If you can't assure people that they know who you are, you're not going to motivate them to go out and vote. And more importantly, you're going to make them feel uncomfortable about who's taking them into the future.
There are already indications that Republicans are looking at what happened here in Ohio as a blueprint for future campaigns. As one GOP leader told me today, we used to be the party that prayed for rain on Election Day, but we're not anymore. Dan?
Thanks, Cynthia Bowers in Columbus, Ohio. In U.S. Senate races, there was a stunner in South Dakota. Senate Democratic leader Tom Daschle was defeated by Republican John Thune. In Florida, Mel Martinez became the first Cuban-American elected to the Senate, defeating Democrat Betty Castor. Also in their sweep of Southern Senate races in Louisiana, even Republicans were surprised when the party's David Vitter was elected by an outright majority in a multi-candidate race. One bright spot for Democrats, Barack Obama, easily won in Illinois over Alan Keyes in a Senate race. All told, the Republicans increased their Senate majority from 1 seat up to 5. And in the House, Democrats had hoped to cut into the Republican majority. Instead, Republicans may have gained a couple of seats in the new House. Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, change is on the way, possibly in the Supreme Court, more certainly in the President's cabinet. We'll give you the inside story. Then later, world leaders react to President Bush's decisive win. We'll tell you what they said and some of the challenges they see.
Victory.
But first, another U.S. Army soldier was killed in Iraq today and a second wounded by a roadside bomb south of Baghdad. Also today, an American businessman was kidnapped from his home in the Iraqi capital. And a suicide car bomber attacked a checkpoint at the Baghdad airport, killing an Iraqi guard and wounding several Iraqi civilians. Iraq is just one issue President Bush will be dealing with in his second term, one of many decisive and divisive issues that could affect Americans long after Mr. Bush leaves office. CBS's Bill Plant gives you the inside story.
Chief Justice William Rehnquist, suffering from thyroid cancer, was absent when the Supreme Court opened Monday, and his empty chair was a mute reminder of fierce partisan battles to come in the president's second term. There have been no vacancies on the court in 10 years, and 4 of the 9 justices are over 70. That could mean 2 or 3 openings in the next 4 years, altering the shape of the court for the next 40, as it rules on hot-button issues such as abortion, gay marriage, and stem cell research. The new chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee says members of the current court lack the stature of great justices of the past.
I would like to see us select someone in the mold of Holmes, Brandeis, Cardozo, or Marshall. With all due respect to the U.S. Supreme Court, we don't have one.
Cabinet changes are also likely in a second term. Secretary of State Colin Powell, who was often at odds with the Defense Department over the Iraq War, has told friends he'll be leaving. UN Ambassador John Danforth has been mentioned as a possible replacement. Attorney General John Ashcroft is deeply controversial for handling of civil liberties and immigration, and may be on the way out. Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani and White House counsel Alberto Gonzales are possible successors. But with a difficult war in progress, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld is not expected to leave anytime soon. There will be 4 more Republicans in the Senate next year, and that may make things a little easier for the president. But at least some of his battles over nominees for court and cabinet are still likely to be bloody. Dan?
Bill Plant reporting live from the White House. Thank you, Bill. Election ballots in many states included propositions for voters to consider. Here are some of the results. Bans on same-sex marriage passed in all 11 states where they were proposed. A plan for proportional awarding of electoral college votes was defeated in Colorado. Florida and Nevada voters passed increases in their state's minimum wage. And Californians passed a plan for $3 billion in support for embryonic stem cell research. You're watching the CBS Evening News, and up next, those early exit polls, supposedly real information from real voters. So why were so many of them, including some of ours, wrong? In the first post-election trading day on Wall Street, the Dow gained more than 100 points, the Nasdaq 19. In future elections, political analysts may put a bit less stock in the inside track data from exit polls. That's because some of the early numbers that got into circulation yesterday turned out to be misleading. CBS's Richard Schlesinger has some data on that.
I'm taking national election polls. Exit polls? Exit polls.
Natalia Busey and about 1,500 exit pollsters like her spent yesterday gathering some of the most closely watched numbers in the political world.
In today's election for president, did you vote for John Kerry, George Bush, John Kerry?
Yesterday, a few of those early numbers leaked to some bloggers, and today there are a few red faces in cyberspace where some of the information was published.
It's not supposed to be leaked to the campaigns or to characterize who's ahead or who's behind during the day. That's not the purpose of the first wave of exit poll data.
The internet published numbers showing a close race, but one that Kerry was on the way to winning. According to one post, Kerry would win not just Ohio, but Florida as well.
We're waiting for hard data to confirm.
The networks, including this one, struggled with the early numbers, but resisted the temptation to call races based on exit polls. We did report the optimism in the Kerry camp early in the night. Of course, that optimism turned out to be misplaced, based largely on early exit polls that are notoriously unreliable.
The first wave of data has smaller sample sizes and is only interviewing people that voted that morning, so they're not necessarily going to accurately reflect the entire day's worth of interviews.
How concerned are you about the availability and cost of health care?
Election experts have warned for years that poll numbers are given too much credibility by a nation eager for quick information. This year, it was internet bloggers who learned the hard way not to consider those numbers a snapshot of voter attitude when they're really just a small part of a much larger picture. Richard Schlesinger, CBS News, New York.
In a very real sense, the whole world was watching yesterday as Americans went to the polls. And as CBS's Richard Roth reports from London, the reaction to President Bush's re-election victory was mixed.
Some of America's critics called the second term a second chance for President Bush, but Russia's Vladimir Putin said it's simply cause for joy. Mr. Bush's re-election means Americans aren't intimidated by terrorism, he said. Italy's prime minister echoed the thought, and so did Israel's. Governments that have differed with the U.S. were gracious but cautious. Now what can we do together, asked the French foreign minister, to rebuild the relationship? Fix Iraq was the message to America, and fix the Palestinian problem. In a statement from his hospital bed, Yasser Arafat urged the administration to get more engaged. Foreign reaction, like American politics, is divided between a hope there will be less anger among allies and a fear divisions now could get worse.
In his first 4 years, George Bush was deeply divisive and polarizing in world opinion. If he does that again in the next 4 years, it will be even more difficult to defeat terrorism with an international coalition.
Britain's prime minister faced a different dilemma. Confirmation of Bush's victory hadn't arrived when Tony Blair, with a teasing sense of timing, addressed Parliament.
Would join with me in sending our warmest congratulations to President Karzai of Afghanistan. Like everyone else, I wait the outcome of the other presidential election with interest.
With interest and relief. In fact, he'd already phoned congratulations to the White House. Richard Roth, CBS News, London.
And that's part of our world. Later on 60 Minutes Wednesday, how President Bush pulled off his re-election victory. Plus, a U.S. soldier attacked by an enemy he never expected. And two guys called Click and Clack. 60 Minutes Wednesday, tonight at 8, 7 Central. We invite you to join us then and again tomorrow for the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. See you soon on 60 Minutes Wednesday.
For news 24 hours a day, click on cbsnews.com. Brought to you in part by Walmart. Getting a sneak peek of your baby at the mall. Is it safe? Tomorrow. Experience CBS News.
Finally tonight, for the benefit of viewers who might have chosen this network over CBS News on election night, here is a sample of what you missed.
This presidential race has been, it's been cracking like a hickory fire for at least the last hour and a half to 2 hours. I know that you'd rather walk through a furnace in a gasoline suit. This race is hotter than a Times Square Rolex, and it has been all night long. George Bush is sweeping through the South like a big wheel through a Delta cotton field. He's got it back to the wall, his shirt tail's on fire, and the bill collector's at the door. The situation in Ohio would give an aspirin a headache if you've been tuning in and out, or you put the baby to bed, or you went to pop the cap on an adult or otherwise beverage. John Kerry has his lead is as thin as turnip soup. Just to say, if a frog had side pockets, he'd carry a handgun.
And that's special report for this time. Please come again next time, and in the meantime, stay tuned for news. Fair, balanced, and unafraid.